What is it about old houses that makes people think of ghosts? Is it the groaning of the floorboards as the ancient timbers settle? The way the wind sighs through loose window frames, sounding like a mournful whisper? Or is it just the sheer weight of history, the silent accumulation of lives lived and lost within the same four walls? For me, it was never about ghosts. Blackwood Manor wasn't haunted, it was just heavy. Heavy with the memories of a family that was, and the crushing expectation of what it was supposed to become. My name is Victor, and this is the story of how I saved my family home by making my sister believe it was damned. The day our parents' lawyer read the will was the day the battle lines were drawn. It was a cold, sterile office, all chrome and black leather, a place utterly devoid of the warmth and history that defined the very thing we were there to discuss. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies with a face like a worn-out briefcase, droned on in a monotone that could numb a hornet. He read through the disposition of their stocks, their car, their modest savings, and then he got to the main event, Blackwood Manor. To my children Virginia and Victor, he read, peering over his glasses, I bequeath Blackwood Manor, and all its contents, in equal shares. May you be better stewards of its legacy than I was. I felt a lump form in my throat at that last part. Dad's little admission of guilt. He'd loved the house but lacked the funds and the will to stop its slow, graceful decay. He'd always hoped one of us would take up the cause. I felt a deep, resonant pull toward that responsibility. It felt like a sacred duty. Virginia, on the other hand, just sighed. It was a sharp, impatient sound, the kind she made when a barista was taking too long with her oat milk latte. She tapped her perfectly manicured nails on the mahogany table. Equal shares, she repeated, not as a question, but as a confirmation of a problem. I knew what was coming. I'd known for years. We were sitting in that sterile office, but in my mind, I was already back at the manor, smelling the dust in the old paper and the faint, sweet scent of wood smoke that clung to the velvet curtains even in summer. I could see the way the afternoon light hit the stained glass window on the main landing, fracturing into a kaleidoscope of emeralds and rubies on the worn oak floor. That house was my entire childhood. It was the place I hid in the library during my parents' arguments, the place I learned to ride a bike on the winding gravel driveway, the place where Grandpa Thomas taught me how to identify constellations from the Widow's Walk. To Virginia, it was none of those things. To her, it was an asset, a non-performing asset, a crumbling pile of stone and timber, sitting on 25 acres of prime, developable land, just far enough from the city to be trendy. Well, she said, snapping her designer wallet shut with a decisive click, that's straightforward enough. I'll call Marcus in the morning. Marcus was Marcus Thorne, a slick developer with a predatory smile who had been sniffing around the property for years, sending my father lowball offers that Dad used as kindling for the fireplace. You'll call him about what? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She looked at me as if I were a particularly dense student at the back of her business class. Virginia was in finance, of course. She saw the world as a series of spreadsheets. About the sale, Victor, obviously. We'll need to get it appraised, but Marcus's last offer was 7 figures, split 2 ways. That's a life-changing amount of money. You could finally get a real job. A real job. I was a history teacher. I had a master's degree. I helped shape young minds. But in Virginia's world, if you didn't have a corner office and a 6-figure bonus, you were basically a professional hobbyist. I don't want to sell, Ginny, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Dad didn't want us to sell. Dad's gone, she said, her voice devoid of any real emotion. It was a statement of fact, like noting the stock market had closed, and he left us with a massive, rotting money pit that costs a fortune in taxes and heating. Selling is the only logical thing to do. It's our home, I insisted, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. It's been in the family for 150 years, and now the family can't afford it. Look, Victor, she said, softening her tone into that patronizing, syrupy voice she used when she was about to manipulate someone. I know you have all these sentimental attachments, but we have to be adults about this. The place is a ruin. It needs a new roof. The wiring is a fire hazard. The plumbing is shot. It would take a fortune to restore it. a fortune neither of us has. She wasn't wrong about the state of the house. It was crumbling, but she was wrong about me. She saw a dreamy history teacher, a man lost in the past. She'd forgotten who I was before that. She'd forgotten about the summers I didn't spend at the manor. The argument continued for weeks. We moved into the house, ostensibly to sort through our parents' belongings, but really it was a Cold War, fought over dusty furniture and peeling wallpaper. I'd spend my days making lists of necessary repairs, researching historical restoration grants, dreaming of bringing the place back to its former glory. Virginia would spend her days on the phone with Marcus Thorne, talking about zoning variances and demolition permits. Then the haunting began. It started small, a flickering light in the hallway, outside my bedroom. I was reading one night, when the power in the antique brass lamp by my bed began to stutter, on off, in a quick, annoying rhythm. I checked the bulb, wiggled the plug. Nothing. It seemed to have a mind of its own. Virginia, walking past my open door, stopped and put a hand to her chest. "Ooh, creepy," she said, with a little smirk. "Maybe old great-aunt Minerva is trying to tell us something." I didn't think much of it. The wiring was ancient, after all. A few nights later, it was the whispers. I was in the library, cataloging Dad's collection of first editions, when I heard it. A faint, ethereal whoosh, followed by what sounded like a drawn-out sigh. It seemed to come from the far corner of the room, near the fireplace. I froze, listening. It came again. Whose? Virginia was in the kitchen. I could hear her clattering dishes. She couldn't have made the sound. For a split second, a genuine primal chill ran down my spine. The house was old. People had died here. But then my brain kicked in. The sound was too clean, too perfect. It sounded looped. The final piece of her amateur production was the cold spots. One morning, I walked into the grand ballroom, a cavernous space we hadn't used in 30 years, and a patch of air by the French doors was arctic. It was a tangible, biting cold, the kind that seeps into your bones. It was a warm autumn day, yet here was a pocket of winter. I walked into it, and then out of it. It was no bigger than a telephone booth. I looked down and saw a faint, almost invisible residue on the floorboards. That's when I knew. I knelt down, touched my finger to the floor, and brought it to my nose. The faint, chemical smell was unmistakable. Carbon dioxide. She was using dry ice. A classic, cheap, amateur move. That night, she cornered me in the kitchen. She was wearing a concerned expression, but her eyes were gleaming with triumph. "Victor," she said, her voice a stage whisper. "I don't think we can stay here. The lights, the noises. I heard a woman crying last night, and the ballroom is freezing. This house, it's not right. It's trying to drive us out." She was laying it on so thick, I could have frosted a cake with it. She was playing on my supposed fear, my sensitive, artistic nature. She thought she was directing a horror movie, where I was the terrified victim who would flee, leaving her free to sign the papers with Marcus Thorne and bulldoze our family's entire history into a pile of splinters. What Virginia had forgotten, what she had dismissed as just another one of my weird, impractical phases, was that before I became a history teacher, I got a degree in theatrical technology from Carnegie Mellon. And for 4 summers, I didn't scoop ice cream or work as a camp counselor. I designed and built special effects for a professional haunted house attraction in Pennsylvania, one of the biggest and most terrifying on the East Coast. She thought she was scaring me with a flickering bulb, a sound loop from a Halloween store, and a block of dry ice. It was like a child showing a magic trick to a professional illusionist. It wasn't scary, it was insulting. I looked at her fake, worried face, and I felt something shift inside me. It was a deep, tectonic movement, the grinding of plates of love and resentment that had been pressing against each other for decades. All the years of being the other son, the disappointment, the one whose passions were tolerated but never celebrated like her ambition was. All the time she'd belittled my interests, borrowed money she never repaid, and treated me like her personal, reliable, but ultimately pathetic older brother. It all coalesced into a single cold point of clarity. She wanted to stage a haunting to force me out. Fine. But she had brought a knife to a cannon fight. I stood there, letting my face show the fear she wanted to see. I let my hand tremble a little as I reached for a glass of water. "You might be right, Ginny," I said, my voice cracking just so. Maybe this house doesn't want us here." Her eyes lit up. She had me. She was so close to her payday. But as I looked at her, past her, through the doorway, and into the dark, silent hall of Blackwood Manor, I made a silent vow. This house wasn't haunted. Not yet. But it was about to be. And she was going to be the only one who was scared. The haunting was about to get very, very real. The weight of her betrayal didn't hit me like a punch. It was more like a slow-acting poison, a creeping cold that started in my gut and spread through my veins over the next few days. It wasn't the cheapness of her tricks that hurt. It was the chilling calculation behind them. She had looked at our shared grief, our shared history, and the very foundation of our family, and saw it only as an obstacle to be removed. She saw me as an obstacle. She hadn't just tried to trick me. She had tried to weaponize my love for our home against me. It was a profound, fundamental violation of a trust I hadn't even realized was so fragile. I found myself wandering the halls of the manor like a ghost myself, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. Every creak of the floorboards, every rattle of a window pane, now felt like a personal accusation. I'd run my hand over the cool, smooth marble of a mantelpiece or the rough, flaking paint of a windowsill, and a slideshow of memories would play in my head. I remembered one Christmas. I must have been 10. Dad had managed to get the big fireplace in the great hall working for the first time in years. The fire was roaring, casting dancing shadows on the walls. I was lying on the big bearskin rug, a relic from some long-dead ancestor's hunting trip, reading a book of ghost stories. Virginia, who was 12, came in, dressed for a party at a friend's house. She looked at the fire, at me, at the dusty, drafty room, and wrinkled her nose. "It smells like a campsite in here," she'd announced. "Can't we just use the central heating like normal people?" My father, who had spent the entire day sweeping the chimney and hauling wood, just deflated. The light in his eyes dimmed. He'd smiled a weak smile and said, "Your sister's right, Vic, it's a bit much." He never lit that fireplace again. Virginia had a knack for that, for sucking the joy and whimsy out of a room with a single pragmatic comment. She was the golden child, not in a loud, obnoxious way, but in a quiet, insidious one. Our parents, both practical people who'd had to work hard for everything they had, saw her ambition as a virtue. She got a business degree. I got an arts degree. Her path was clear and lucrative. Mine was seen as a charming but ultimately pointless detour. When she landed her first internship at a big firm, they took her out for a lavish dinner at the most expensive restaurant in town. When I got the lead role in a university production of Hamlet, my father patted me on the shoulder and said, "That's nice, son. Just make sure you're keeping your grades up in your real classes." It wasn't malicious. It was just a fundamental misunderstanding of who I was. They loved me, I knew they did, but they understood Virginia. Her desires were logical. Mine were eccentricities. This dynamic bled into everything. Over the years, I became the family's emotional and practical caretaker. When Dad's car broke down, I was the one who spent a weekend under the hood fixing it. When Mom needed help canning the peaches from the old orchard, I was the one with stained hands and an aching back. Virginia was always too busy, too important. She'd sweep in for holidays, bringing expensive gifts that felt more like transactions than tokens of affection, and accept our parents' praise for being so successful, while I was just there, the reliable, dusty, unchanging furniture of their lives. And I let it happen. That's the part that gnawed at me now, in the cold light of her betrayal. I had enabled it. I had accepted the role of the dependable, slightly tragic artist-in-residence of the family. I never pushed back, never demanded my own space, my own validation. My passivity had been mistaken for contentment. She mistook my kindness for weakness. That thought became a mantra, a drumbeat in my mind. She didn't just think I was a sentimental fool, she thought I was a pushover. And she was right. I had been. The memory that truly solidified my resolve, that turned my grief into something cold and hard and sharp, was of my summers. The summers Virginia spent at competitive business camps, or interning in the city, I spent in the grease paint and latex-scented workshops of Grave Encounters, a sprawling haunted attraction built into an old abandoned industrial park. My parents thought I was just goofing off, playing with Halloween toys. They didn't understand the complexity, the artistry, the sheer technical genius that went into scaring the living daylights out of thousands of people a night. I started as a grunt, hauling flats and painting sets. But the head designer, a grizzled, ponytailed genius named Frank, saw something in me. He saw my sketches, my understanding of sightlines and misdirection. By my second summer, I was helping him design entire sections of the haunt. I learned about pneumatic actuators that could make a prop lunge at a precise moment. I learned about DMX controllers that could orchestrate lights, sound, and fog machines into a perfect symphony of terror. I learned how to build a Pepper's Ghost illusion with a simple pane of glass and clever lighting, making specters appear out of thin air. I learned about psychoacoustics, how to use low-frequency rumbles just below the threshold of human hearing to create a pervasive sense of dread and anxiety. Virginia knew nothing of this. Or if she did, she'd filed it away under Victor's weird hobbies and forgotten it completely. She was about to get a refresher course. The catalyst, the final push I needed, came 3 days after her clumsy attempt with the dry ice. My phone buzzed. It was a text from her. Still spooked. Maybe it's time to call Marcus. This place is giving me the creeps for real now. The winking emoji was what did it. The sheer unadulterated condescension. The smug satisfaction. She wasn't just tricking me, she was enjoying it. She was savoring my supposed fear, picturing the commission check she'd get from the sale. I didn't reply. I went up to the attic, a place she hadn't set foot in for 20 years because of the spiders. It was a treasure trove of family history, packed with dusty trunks and forgotten furniture. But I wasn't looking for sentiment. I was looking for ammunition. In a heavy oak chest full of my great-grandmother's things, I found it. Not a secret will or a hidden deed, but her personal journals. My great-grandmother, a stern, imposing matriarch whom I only knew from a single fearsome-looking portrait in the main hall. Virginia was named after her, a fact she'd always hated. The journals were filled with her daily life, her thoughts, her worries. And as I skimmed the elegant, looping cursive, I found what I was looking for. She had a recurring nightmare about a broken music box, one her father had given her. It would play a discordant, off-key version of Greensleeves. She wrote about a profound fear of mirrors in the dark, terrified of seeing a doppelganger staring back. And she wrote about the unique, cloying scent of withered roses, because a bowl of them had been in the room when her own mother passed away. These weren't generic spooky things. These were specific, personal, psychological triggers. These were the building blocks of a truly bespoke haunting. My next call was to Leo Martinez, my partner in crime from the Grave Encounters days. He'd been the audio and lighting savant to my practical effects and set design. After Frank retired, Leo had started his own company, Spectre Systems, providing high-end effects for theater, concerts, and even military training simulations. He was the best there was. Victor, my man, to what do I owe the honor? Don't tell me you're finally ditching those snot-nosed kids to come back to the dark side, he boomed over the phone. Not exactly, Leo, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face for the first time in weeks. I've got a personal project, a one-woman show, and I need the best tech you've got. I explained the situation, the house, my sister, her pathetic little ghost show. At first, Leo was hesitant. Whoa, man, that's your sister. A little harsh, don't you think? Staging a full-on psych-op on your own family. This is the woman, I said, my voice flat, who once sold my mint-condition collection of classic sci-fi comics to pay for a weekend trip to Cabo and then told my parents I must have lost them. This is the woman who convinced Dad not to co-sign a loan for me to start a small workshop after college because it wasn't a viable career path. This is the woman who is currently trying to psychologically manipulate me into giving up my inheritance and our family's history so she can get a fat check. It's not about revenge, Leo, not entirely. It's about theatrical justice. There was a pause on the line. Then I heard him chuckle. It started low, then grew into a full-bellied laugh. Theatrical justice. I love it, you son of a gun. You always were the most creatively evil one of the bunch. All right, I'm in. What do you need? Everything, I said. And I need it delivered in unmarked vans. The plan began to form, not as a vague idea, but as a detailed schematic, a production schedule. I felt a dormant part of my brain flicker to life, the part that thought in terms of cues, sightlines, and sensory immersion. Virginia thought she was the director of this little drama. She had no idea I was about to take over the production. The house wasn't the stage anymore, she was. And the show was about to begin. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. And now, it was about creating a masterpiece. The first step in any good production is to scout the location and understand the existing infrastructure. For me, this meant a systematic, top-to-bottom sweep of Blackwood Manor to find every single one of Virginia's clumsy little tricks. It was laughably easy. The flickering light in the hall, a cheap screw-in flicker adapter she'd bought online, the kind people use for Halloween jack-o'-lanterns. I found the packaging in the kitchen trash. The ghostly whispers in the library, a small battery-powered Bluetooth speaker tucked behind a row of encyclopedias, connected to her phone. She'd downloaded a $10 Spooky Sounds app. The quality was terrible. You could hear the digital compression. And the cold spot was, as I suspected, the result of a block of dry ice she'd hidden in a decorative urn near the French doors. Amateur hour. My first move was one of subtle subversion. I didn't remove her devices. I improved them. That night, while she was out having dinner with Marcus Thorne, no doubt celebrating their impending victory, I went to work. I took her little Bluetooth speaker from the library. I had my own gear now, a small toolkit I'd always kept from my college days. I carefully pried the casing open, desoldered the original speaker driver, and replaced it with a higher fidelity one. Then, using a simple audio editor on my laptop, I took the cheesy whisper loop she was using and pitched it down, adding a layer of low-frequency rumble and a touch of reverb that I sampled from the acoustics of the library itself. I made it sound like the whisper was part of the room, not just a sound playing in the room. I put the speaker back exactly where I found it. She wouldn't notice the change in hardware, but she would feel the change in quality. The fear would be clearer, more defined. Next, the lights. The simple on-off flicker was boring. It was a cliché. I went down to the breaker box in the cellar. The wiring in the house was ancient knob and tube, a genuine fire hazard, but the circuit for the upstairs hallway was at least isolated. I found the junction box in the attic. It took me less than an hour to wire in a micro DMX controller, a tiny programmable unit no bigger than a deck of cards. I connected it to a small hidden Wi-Fi access point. Now I could control that hallway light from my laptop with theatrical precision. It would no longer just flicker. It could fade, pulse, surge, and die on command. The first program I wrote was a simple one. A slow, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat, a very, very slow heartbeat. This was phase 1. The upgrade. Let her think her own haunting was getting stronger, more assertive. Let her believe that the house itself was amplifying her efforts. The most effective deceptions are the ones the mark helps to build themselves. While I was waiting for Leo's delivery, I dove back into my research. I spent hours in the attic with great-grandmother Minerva's journals, cross-referencing her fears with the layout of the house. She wrote about her music box, a gift from her father. I searched the attic and found it in a dusty hat box. It was a beautiful inlaid rosewood box, but the mechanism inside was rusted and broken. When I tried to wind it, it produced a horrifying, discordant clanking sound. Perfect. I also spent time in the county records office. This was the boring, practical part of the plan. the part that had to work in the real world, not just in Virginia's terrified mind. I pulled the deeds and titles for Blackwood Manor going back a century, and I found something interesting. A little bit of plausible inaccuracy that a lawyer could have a field day with. When our great-grandfather established the family trust that held the property, he included a peculiar clause. The property was to be managed for the well-being and posterity of the family line. In the event of a proposed sale by the designated heirs, the trust stipulated that the decision must be unanimous and made free from any undue distress or coercion, with both parties being of sound mind and clear judgment. It was archaic, probably legally unenforceable on its own, but undue distress, sound mind. A good lawyer could argue that a person claiming their ancestral home is haunted and trying to desperately sell it for that reason is not making a decision with clear judgment. They might be acting under undue distress. It was a seed of doubt, a legal lever. It meant that if she tried to force a sale, I could contest it, drag it out in court for years, and make her look like she'd lost her marbles. The haunting wasn't just to scare her into giving up. It was to build a legal case against her sanity. A few days later, 2 plain white vans arrived. The drivers, 2 of Leo's most trusted technicians who knew me from the old days, helped me unload the equipment. It was like Christmas for a tech head. We brought in cases containing 6 ultra-directional sound-lensing speakers. These were the jewels of the operation. They could focus a beam of sound to a specific spot, as small as a person's head, from 50 feet away. Someone standing 2 feet to the side would hear nothing. We brought in a professional-grade fog chiller and a scent nebulizer. We brought in compact, battery-powered LED projectors, a dozen wireless micro cameras, and the centerpiece, a massive custom-cut sheet of theatrical scrim, a special fabric that is opaque when lit from the front, but transparent when lit from behind. Leo had even included a note. "Victor, you magnificent bastard, knock 'em dead. Or just scare the hell out of." P.S. I threw in a couple of haptic floor transducers, just for fun. Stick 'em under the floorboards. You'll know when to use them. Haptic transducers, devices that create vibrations. My smile widened. Leo, you genius. The next 2 days were a blur of secret activity. I became a phantom in my own home. While Virginia was at work or out with friends, I was running cables, mounting cameras, and positioning speakers. I hid a sound lenser in the ductwork above her bedroom, aimed directly at her pillow. I placed another in the grand chimney in the main hall, aimed at the wingback chair she liked to sit in while she made her smug phone calls. I set up the LED projector in the attic, aimed at the upstairs hallway ceiling, ready to project a faint, swirling pattern that would look like ethereal smoke. The biggest installation was the scrim. The main upstairs hallway was long and dark, with a large, ornate mirror at the far end. It was the perfect place for a Pepper's ghost illusion. I hung the scrim taut and invisible about 10 feet in front of the mirror. In a small hidden alcove to the side, I set up a simple mannequin, dressed it in a high-collared black dress from one of my great-grandmother's trunks, and positioned a focus spotlight on it. When that light came on, and the hallway lights went down, the reflection of the lit mannequin would appear on the scrim, creating a perfect, 3-dimensional ghostly apparition that seemed to float in the middle of the hall. It would only be visible from a specific angle, the angle at which someone would be standing when exiting Virginia's bedroom. The final touch was the sound design. This was my favorite part. I wasn't just using generic sounds anymore. I took the broken music box to the library, which had the best acoustics in the house, and recorded its horrible, clanking tune with a high-sensitivity microphone. I digitized it, cleaned it up just enough to make every discordant note crystal clear, and loaded it into my audio software. Then, I recorded myself whispering. I whispered Virginia's name over and over, in different intonations, some sad, some angry, some pleading. I digitally altered my own voice, pitching it up to sound like an old woman, adding a faint, breathy quality. This was great-grandmother Minerva's voice now. I linked everything, the lights, the sound lenses, the fog machine, the projector, the haptic transducers, and all the cameras to a central control program on my laptop. I could sit in the library, the nerve center of my operation, and watch Virginia on my screen, orchestrating the entire haunting in real time, like a symphony conductor. My secret plan was complete. The set was built, the props were in place, the script was written in the ink of my great-grandmother's journals. I had the foresight, I had the ally in Leo, and I had the hidden leverage in that dusty old legal clause. The house was now a fully interactive, multi-sensory theater of fear, and my sister was about to be its sole audience member. I felt a pang of something. Was it guilt? No, it was the thrill of the artist. The quiet, humming satisfaction of a perfectly executed design. She wanted to play games. It was time to show her how the game is really played. The first move of the real haunting was designed to be subtle, a gentle turning of the screw. I waited until Tuesday night. Virginia had a routine. She'd come home from work, make a kale smoothie, complain about her boss, and then retreat to the main hall to sit in her favorite wingback chair and scroll through her phone. It was her little island of modern normalcy in the sea of what she considered gothic decay. I was in the library, my laptop open, a pair of high-quality headphones over my ears. I had a camera view of the main hall. I watched as she settled into the chair, her back to the grand fireplace. The show began. Q1. Audio. Through the sound lenser I'd hidden in the chimney, I sent the first sound. Not a whisper, not a moan, just a single, soft, breathy sigh, so quiet she might have thought it was the wind. I saw her pause her scrolling. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She tilted her head, listening. She shrugged and went back to her phone. I waited a full 5 minutes. Then I triggered it again. This time, I added the faintest hint of a word, my digitally altered Minerva voice, whispering her name. Virginia. Her head snapped up. She looked around the empty room, her eyes wide. The room was silent. The sound had been beamed directly into her ears. To anyone else, there would have been nothing. Hello? She called out, her voice a little shaky. Victor, is that you? I remained silent in the library. I watched her on the screen. She stood up, walked around the chair, and peered into the dark maw of the fireplace. Nothing. She was getting spooked, but she was still looking for a rational, physical source. She was still looking for the speaker. Q2. Scent. As she stood there, puzzled, I activated the scent nebulizer. I'd hidden in a nearby floor vent, a tiny, almost invisible puff of aerosolized rose oil, not fresh rose, but the heavy, cloying scent of dried, withered petals I'd concocted, based on Minerva's journal. I saw her nose twitch. She sniffed the air. What is that smell? She said aloud to the empty room. Her face, which had been confused, was now laced with disgust. She walked around the room, sniffing like a bloodhound. The scent was localized, strongest right by the chair. She couldn't find the source. This was the first thing that was truly impossible for her to explain. A sound can be a trick of the ears. A scent, however, is a physical presence. She abandoned her chair and went into the kitchen, looking unsettled. She was texting furiously, probably complaining to a friend about the creepy old house. I let her stew for the rest of the evening. I did nothing more. The key to a good haunting is pacing. You don't bombard the subject. You create an atmosphere of unpredictable dread. You make them fear the silence between the events more than the events themselves. The next night, I escalated. It was time for the music box. She was in her bedroom, getting ready for bed. I had a sound lenser aimed at her pillow. As she was turning down the covers, I played the recording of the broken music box. Not loud, just a faint tinny clanking melody. The discordant, off-key notes of Greensleeves, plinking away, as if from a great distance. I watched her on camera. She froze, hand in the air. She checked her phone. She looked at her laptop. The sound wasn't coming from any of her devices. It was just there, in the air, in her head. Clink, clink, plink. Victor, she yelled, her voice sharp with real fear. Stop it. I know you're doing this. I grabbed the walkie-talkie I'd set up. My half of a cheap pair. I clicked it on. Ginny, what's wrong? I'm down in the workshop. My voice was groggy, as if she'd woken me. The music, the creepy music box. Music. Make it stop, she shrieked. I let a few seconds of static hiss. Music. I don't hear anything, Ginny. Are you okay? There's no music playing. I stopped the recording. The sound vanished. The silence rushed in to fill the void. I could hear her ragged breathing over the walkie-talkie. It was just there, she whispered. I swear, it was right here. You're probably just tired, I said, my voice full of fake concern. This house is getting to you. Maybe you should try to get some sleep. This was the turning point. Before, she was the one in control, the puppeteer. Now, she was accusing me of her own game, and I was denying it, turning her own gaslighting back on her. She had no proof. She was experiencing things no one else could hear, things that stopped the moment she tried to call them out. She was losing control of the narrative. Her panic was beginning to build. Over the next few days, her demeanor changed entirely. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by a jittery, nervous energy. She stopped spending time alone in the big rooms. She'd carry her laptop into the brightly lit kitchen to work instead of the grand hall. She started leaving lights on all over the house, which was completely out of character for the fiscally conservative Virginia. Her calls and texts to me became frantic. The lights in the hall were breathing last night. Victor, I saw them. My reply. Must be another short in the wiring. I'll take a look at it. I heard her again. The woman. She was whispering my name. My reply. Ginny, I think you're under a lot of stress. I haven't heard a thing. The more I feigned ignorance and concern, the more frantic she became. She was trying to convince me that the house was haunted. But now she was the one who truly believed it. She had started her haunting to create a pretext for selling. Now she had a genuine, terrifying reason. But the person she needed to convince didn't believe her. The irony was exquisite. The true panic set in on Friday. She had a video call with Marcus Thorne. I knew because she'd mentioned it earlier, back when she was still confident. She set up her laptop in the library, probably wanting the backdrop of leather-bound books to make her look distinguished. I had a camera tucked into a bookshelf, giving me a perfect view of her face as she was talking to him, detailing the unfortunate delays, but assuring him the property would soon be theirs. I started my symphony. I began with the scent of withered roses. Just a faint trace. I saw her nostrils flare on my screen. She tried to ignore it. Then through the speakers she herself had hidden, I played the improved whisper loop. The sound was clearer now, more intimate. Get out. Her eyes darted around the room. She lost her train of thought. I'm sorry, Marcus. What was that? She said into her laptop, trying to cover her distraction. Then came the grand finale of the evening. Leo's fun little toys. Underneath the floorboards right where her chair was positioned, I had installed one of the haptic floor transducers. I slowly brought up the frequency on my control panel. A deep subsonic rumble that she would feel more than hear. A vibration that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the house. Her teacup, on the table next to her, began to rattle. I watched her face on the monitor. The color drained from it. Her professional, composed mask crumbled into raw panic. Marcus, she stammered, her voice trembling. I have to go. Something's wrong. She slammed the laptop shut without waiting for his reply. She jumped up from the chair as if it were electric. She backed away, staring at the rattling teacup. Her hands pressed to her mouth. The house was vibrating. A woman was whispering in her ear. The room smelled of death. For the first time, I think she truly believed she was in the presence of something malevolent and supernatural. She had wanted to create a ghost. She had succeeded far beyond her wildest dreams. She ran from the room, and I heard her footsteps thundering up the main staircase, followed by the sound of her bedroom door slamming shut and the deadbolt being thrown. I sat back in the library, the nerve center, and allowed myself a small, tight smile. The antagonist was officially in a state of panic. It was time to prepare for the final act. The power shift was palpable. Virginia went from being the predator to being the prey in her own manufactured wilderness. She stopped leaving her room after dark. I'd hear her order food delivery and instruct the driver to leave it on the front porch, scurrying out to grab the bag, and then bolting back inside her locked room. The hunter was now the hunted, trapped in a prison of her own making. The irony was thick enough to choke on. My quiet, feigned fear had been replaced by her genuine, consuming terror. I no longer had to act. I just had to observe, and occasionally gently turn the screw. The time had come for the main event. The showstopper I'd been meticulously planning. It was time for great-grandmother Minerva to make a personal appearance. I waited for a Sunday night, the night before a new week, when anxieties are always at their highest. I knew Virginia was at her breaking point. She'd spent the weekend making frantic calls to real estate agents, not developers, trying to find a short-term rental apartment in the city. She was desperate to escape. This one last push, I calculated, would be enough to shatter her resolve completely. I started the sequence around 11 p.m. I knew she'd be in her room, probably trying to distract herself with some mindless show on her tablet. I began with the familiar overture. The faint discordant melody of the broken music box beamed directly to her pillow. Then the scent of withered roses seeping from the vent. The house began to groan and settle, but these weren't the natural sounds of old timber. I was using the haptic transducers to create slow, deep vibrations that mimicked the sound of something massive shifting in the walls. Through the micro camera in the hallway, I watched her door. It creaked open. Her face, pale and drawn, peered out into the gloom. The hallway was her only path to the bathroom or the kitchen, her only escape route. She had to brave it eventually. This was her cue. As she stepped out into the hallway, I initiated the lighting sequence. The main overhead lights, which she had left blazing, began to flicker, not randomly, but with that slow, deliberate heartbeat pulse I'd programmed. Boom boom, pause. Boom boom, pause. The light dimmed, casting long, menacing shadows. Her destination was the bathroom at the end of the hall. To get there, she had to walk directly towards the large, ornate mirror, directly into the kill box for my Pepper's ghost illusion. She took a hesitant step, then another. She was holding her phone up, using its flashlight, as if it were a talisman against the dark. I waited until she was exactly at the optimal viewing angle, about 15 feet from the mirror. My fingers flew across my laptop keyboard. Cue hallway lights, fade to 20%. Cue mannequin spotlight, fade up to 100% over 3 seconds. Cue directional audio, play Minerva's whispered name, layered with a sorrowful sigh. I watched on my monitor, my heart pounding with the thrill of the performance. On the screen, I saw what she was seeing. As the hallway lights dimmed, a figure began to resolve in the space in front of the mirror. It wasn't a reflection. It was a three-dimensional, semi-transparent apparition of an old woman in a high-collared black dress, her face pale and sorrowful. The light caught the dust motes in the air, making the image shimmer and sway. It looked utterly, terrifyingly real. "Virginia," the voice whispered, seeming to come from the phantom itself. Virginia stopped dead. The phone slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. A sound escaped her lips, a choked, guttural gasp of pure, undiluted terror. She didn't scream. It was worse than a scream. It was the sound of a mind breaking. She stared, frozen, for a full 5 seconds. The apparition just floated there, silent and accusatory. Then, as planned, the spotlight on the mannequin snapped off. The ghost vanished into thin air. The hallway lights returned to their full, steady brightness. She was left alone in the silent, brightly lit hall, her own terrified reflection staring back at her from the mirror. That was it. That was the moment. Her last shred of skepticism, her last defense of rationality, was obliterated. She scrambled backwards, crab walking away from the spot, her eyes still locked on the empty space where the ghost had been. She got to her feet and fled, not into her room, but down the main staircase, out the front door, and into the night. I heard her car start, tires squealing on the gravel driveway as she sped away. The house was silent again. The performance was over. I sat back in my chair in the library, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving behind a cold, quiet calm. I had won. The family exodus, or at least Virginia's part of it, was complete. The next morning, my phone rang. It was her. Her voice was unrecognizable. It was small, thin, and broken. "Victor," she croaked. "I'm at a hotel. I'm not coming back. You were right. We have to get out. I told you, Guinea, I said, my voice dripping with false sympathy. This place, it's not safe. Sell it, Victor, she pleaded. Just sell it, call Marcus. I don't even care about the price. Just get rid of it. I don't think he'll want it if it's haunted, Ginny, I said, twisting the knife. No developer will. Who would want to build condos on cursed ground? We're stuck with it. There was a long sobbing silence on the other end. Then what do we do? She finally whispered. Here it was. The end game. I've been thinking, I said slowly. Maybe the house doesn't hate the family. Maybe it just hates division. Maybe it wants one of us to take responsibility, to be its keeper. What are you saying? I'll stay, I said, my voice low and solemn. I'll take on the burden. I'll deal with whatever is in there. But I have to do it alone. The house needs a single steward. You need to be free of it, Ginny. For your own safety. For your sanity. But the ownership, she started. It's a curse, Ginny, not an asset. Let me take the curse from you, I said. Sign your half over to me. I'll give you $1 for legal purposes. You can walk away, be free of this nightmare. You can have Mom and Dad's other assets, the stocks, the savings, the proceeds from the sale of their suburban house. I don't want any of it. I just want to protect you from this place. I was offering her an escape, framing my power grab as an act of selfless brotherly sacrifice. I was using her terror, the very terror she had intended for me, as my ultimate tool of manipulation. She was desperate. She was broken. She saw a lifeline. You'd do that? She asked, her voice thick with a mixture of suspicion and desperate hope. I'm your brother, Ginny, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I have to protect you. Okay, she whispered, the fight completely gone from her. Okay, Victor, I'll do it. I'll sign whatever you want. Just make it go away. The power shift was total. It wasn't just that she was scared. It was that I had become her savior, the only one brave enough to stand against the darkness she had unleashed upon herself. She was now completely, utterly dependent on me to solve the problem she had created. The stage was set for the final confrontation, not in the haunted halls of the manor, but in the cold, rational light of a lawyer's office. We met at Mr. Davies' office 2 days later, the same sterile room where the will had been read, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Virginia looked like a ghost herself. She was pale, with dark circles under her eyes, and she clutched a bottle of water in a trembling hand. She jumped at every sound, the clicking of a pen, the ringing of a phone in the outer office. She refused to make eye contact with me, instead staring at a fixed point on the wall as if expecting a specter to burst through it. I, on the other hand, was calm. I was dressed in a simple tweed jacket, the uniform of the history teacher she so despised. I felt a quiet, thrumming power, the confidence of a director on opening night after a flawless dress rehearsal. Mr. Davies, looking perplexed by Virginia's agitated state, slid the documents across the table. It was a simple quitclaim deed. For the sum of $1, she was relinquishing all rights, title, and interest in the property known as Blackwood Manor. Are you certain about this, Virginia? Mr. Davies asked, his brow furrowed with concern. This is a significant asset to be giving away. She just nodded jerkily, not looking at him. I'm certain, she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. I want it gone. She fumbled for a pen, her hand shaking so badly she could barely sign her name. The signature was a spidery, illegible scrawl, but it was legally binding. She pushed the papers back across the table as if they were contaminated. It was done. I slid the signed deed into my briefcase with a soft click. Blackwood Manor was mine. For a moment, we just sat there, in silence. The transaction was complete. I could have let her leave. I could have let her spend the rest of her life, believing she'd been driven from her home by the vengeful spirit of our great-grandmother. But that wasn't enough. Justice, I'd decided, required not just victory, but comprehension. She didn't just need to lose. She needed to know how she had lost, and why. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen, and a sound filled the quiet, sterile office. Who's, the cheap, tinny, looped sound of a ghostly whisper. Her original sound effect. Virginia's head snapped towards me. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. I stopped the sound and swiped to a different file. I played the recording of the broken music box, the horrible clanking version of Greensleeves. Her eyes widened. The confusion was turning into dawning, horrified realization. What is this?" she stammered. "This," I said, my voice even and cold as your haunting. Or at least, the budget version of it. I leaned forward, my hands clasped on the polished table. The flickering light in the hall, a $20 flicker adapter. The cold spot, a block of dry ice from the grocery store. And this, I held up the phone again, is the sound you played from a Bluetooth speaker you hid behind a set of encyclopedias. It was a good try, Ginny. Amateur, but a good first effort. The color, which had been absent from her face, now rushed back in a wave of mottled red. The fear in her eyes was being rapidly replaced by a furious, incandescent rage. "You," she breathed. "It was you. All of it. Not all of it." I corrected her gently. "You started it. I just improved it. I gave it a bigger budget, better production values. You see, you forgot something about me, Ginny. You forgot about my degree in theatrical technology. You forgot about my summers at Grave Encounters. You thought you were dealing with a sensitive history teacher who was afraid of the dark. You were wrong. You were dealing with a professional." I laid it all out for her. The sound lensing speakers, the DMX lighting grid, the scent nebulizer, the haptic transducers. I explained the principle of the Pepper's ghost illusion with the scrim and the mannequin. I told her how I'd used the details from great-grandmother Minerva's journals to tailor the scares specifically to her deepest-seated anxieties. With every word, her posture changed. The terrified victim collapsed, and the entitled, arrogant sister I knew so well re-emerged, her face a mask of fury. "You son of a bitch," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You tricked me. You psychologically tortured me. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to have this overturned." This deed was signed under duress. I smiled, a thin cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Was it? Let's play that out, shall we? You'll go to court and claim that you were coerced into signing away a multi-million-dollar property. And what was the nature of this coercion? You'll have to tell them, under oath, that you believed the house was haunted, that you saw a ghost. You'll sound unstable. And then my lawyer will bring up the clause in great-grandfather's trust about the heirs needing to be of sound mind and clear judgment. Your own testimony will prove you were neither. You will have made my case for me. You'll be a laughingstock, Ginny, and you'll still lose." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish. She saw the trap. She saw how perfectly it was constructed, how every escape route was sealed. Her own actions, her own words, were the bars of her cage. "This was never about the money for me," I told her, my voice softening slightly. "I would have happily worked with you to find a way to keep the house. A trust, a foundation, anything. But you didn't want to work with me. You wanted to eliminate me. You used our family's history as a weapon against me. You tried to turn my love for that place into a weakness. It turns out, my love for that place, and everything I ever learned in its service, was my greatest strength." I stood up and slid my chair back under the table. "You can have the rest of it," I said. "The stocks, the cash, the money from our parents' other house. I don't want it. I only ever wanted Blackwood Manor. Now I have it." I walked to the door, leaving her sitting there, shaking with a rage that had nowhere to go. Her weapon had been turned against her. Her scheme had backfired in the most spectacular way possible, and she had no one to blame but herself. The new reality was sinking in. She had lost, completely and irrevocably. The charade was over. That was the last time I spoke to my sister. The silence that followed was more profound than any of the ghostly whispers I had manufactured. In the months that passed, I began the slow, painstaking process of bringing Blackwood Manor back to life. I hired a structural engineer and a team of old-world craftsmen who revered the house as much as I did. The leaking roof was repaired. The ancient wiring was carefully replaced, and the ghosts of my own making were boxed up and put away. The scent of sawdust and fresh paint replaced the manufactured smell of withered roses. The house was breathing again, a real, living breath of hope and restoration. My friend Leo came to visit one weekend. We stood on the Widow's Walk, looking out over the 25 acres of pristine land. The autumn leaves a riot of gold and crimson. The air was crisp and clean. "You know," he said, a grin playing on his lips, "for a while there, I thought you were a little crazy. But looking at all this Victor, you pulled off the greatest show on earth." "It was just a small intimate production," I said with a smile. "A one-woman show, remember?" We both laughed. It was a good clean sound that echoed in the open air. A sound of victory. I did hear about Virginia, of course. News travels. The slick developer Marcus Thorne dropped her the instant he found out she no longer owned the property. Apparently, her unstable behavior and frantic calls had already made him wary. Without the leverage of Blackwood Manor, she was just another cog in the financial machine. And not a particularly well-liked one. I heard from a cousin that she'd had to sell our parents' suburban home to cover some bad investments she'd made, counting on the massive payday from the manor that never came. She had gotten what she wanted, cash, but it was a pittance compared to what she'd lost, and it was slipping through her fingers. The consequences weren't supernatural. They were the simple mundane results of her own greed and arrogance. And now I'm talking to you. I sit here in the grand library of my home, the fire crackling in the hearth that my father only lit once. The ghosts are gone. The house is quiet, filled not with manufactured dread, but with a deep, abiding peace. I'm surrounded by the history of my family, and I feel like I've finally earned my place in it. I'm not just a caretaker, I'm a restorer. People ask if what I did was wrong. Was it too cruel? Did the punishment fit the crime? She just wanted to sell a house, and I responded with a full-scale psychological operation. I took a multi-million-dollar inheritance from her for the price of a cup of coffee. I suppose it's debatable. Some of you might think I went too far, that I became the monster to fight a monster. And maybe you're right, but from where I'm sitting, surrounded by the legacy she would have turned into rubble, it feels like justice. She saw my passion as a flaw, something to be exploited. She mistook my love for our history as a weakness. What she failed to understand is that the things we love, the things we are passionate about, are never weaknesses. They are our deepest sources of strength. They are the core of who we are. My knowledge of history and my forgotten skills in theatrical design weren't just hobbies. They were the tools I needed to protect the things that mattered. It was never about the money. It was about respect. Respect for our parents' memory, for the generations that came before, and respect for me. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. And even then, it was about proving that the things you can't put a price on are the only things worth fighting for. So I want to ask you, what's the Blackwood Manor in your life? What is the thing you love that someone else has dismissed as worthless? And what would you do to protect it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be reading them. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more. It really helps the channel out. And remember to hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Until next time, take care of your history. It's more powerful than you think.